Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says he's now the target of a federal investigation. According to Powell, he faces criminal indictment because of testimony he gave back in June about a multi-year project to renovate the Federal Reserve buildings. You may remember Powell has repeatedly faced sharp criticism from President Trump and members of his party because of his refusal to lower interest rates. This morning, CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand asked the director of National Economic Council, that's Kevin Hassett, if this investigation would undermine the independence of the Fed. Here's what he said.
I guess the question is, if you think the building costs $20 billion or $10 billion, do you think at some point that it's appropriate for the federal government to investigate? And seems like the Justice Department has decided that they want to see what's going on over there with this building that's, massively more expensive than any building in the history of Washington. And if I were Fed chair, I would want them to do that. I think that it's really important to understand where the taxpayer money goes and to understand why it goes this way or that.
Okay, I want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, can you walk us through what we're learning here?
So what we're learning is that there's just an investigation. And I think the main thing that we should emphasize is that this is the very beginning if there is ever a case. Okay. So what we're talking about right now is a probe. We're talking about the Department of Justice looking into alleged potentially malfeasance. Again, we're talking about that construction project and whether or not there are any legal questions surrounding that construction project. The thing that I think we should all emphasize at this point is that a probe is very different from the grand jury indicting. It's different from the beginning of a criminal case. And so what I'm focused on right now is, does this go to a grand jury? Does a grand jury, and famously the standard for a grand jury is pretty low, it's probable cause. Does a grand jury say, yes, we will indict? What would the charges be? And then how would any hypothetical criminal case proceed?
Yeah, and I think you just answered part of my next question, because you say this is just a probe, but then what are you watching for as more details continue to unfold in all this?
It's a great question. And so specifically what we'd be watching for are what evidence might lead to specific allegations of wrongdoing, meaning under a federal statute. So there's a difference between we think you mismanaged a product and we think you engaged, or excuse me, a project, and we think you engaged in illegal behavior. So what I'm looking for is the evidence that comes out, again, whether or not it's ever presented to a grand jury, what the specific federal statutes would be, and again, how any case would proceed. But we should remember, of course, nobody wants to be on the receiving end of a federal probe.
Of course.
But this is different from being on the receiving end of a federal indictment.
Okay, we shall wait and see what comes next on this one. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for your insight.